Welcome to Babcock Hoops Q&A Sessions. I am your host, Raquel Rodriguez. Jason Filippi of our Babcock Hoops team joined me today. Jason has 19 years of experience in the NBA. He's served as a director of international scouting for the Portland Trail Blazers and as an international scout for the Detroit Pistons and Miami Heat before joining our team. I had the opportunity to ask him about his experience working in the NBA, scouting in Europe, and this year's class of international players, and much more. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Jason. Thank you for joining me today. I'd like to begin by diving right into your experience working in the NBA. How did this all get started for you?
Well, Raquel, I guess I was in the right place at the right time for the first and probably only time in my life, but definitely, a good time to be in the right spot. I was working in pro basketball already. I'd done some journalist work, covering the local teams in Bologna, Italy when I was still finishing college. But that kind of, put my name on the radar, and I worked briefly with a sports agent in Italy, which I really didn't love, but being a sports agent and attending international events is where I met NBA people. This is just to give you a time frame. This was, like 1998, and that was kind of when the Euro craze was beginning. And it just happened that more and more NBA people were approaching me because, they knew I was from Europe and knew that I knew, names, players and stuff, and kept asking for information. In the meantime, my brother Adam, who also works, in the NBA, he was doing some consulting work with the Nets, and he was, experienced the same thing, that more and more people kept, bumming him, for information. And, we kind of said, maybe we should try selling the information. And it was a great idea because some of these teams even approached us. Listen, Jason, I'm sorry to keep asking you stuff, but, maybe I can have you on retainer for a small fee. One thing led to another. And, I just decided to quit the agent business and, have my scouting service. And I did that for 4 years. The Portland Trail Blazers were one of my clients, and they asked me to work exclusively for them after a couple of years. And time was right to make that step. And the rest is history. I worked with the Blazers for 11 years. Then I consulted with the Miami Heat, and I worked with the Pistons for 3 years. So I've been scouting in some way, whether it was directly for an NBA team or with a scouting service for the past 20 years.
You've worked for numerous NBA teams as an international scout. What would you consider to be some of the pros and cons of being an international NBA scout as opposed to being an American-based NBA scout?
Well, in general, whether you're a domestic scout or an international scout, our jobs are still contingent on things that are out of our control. You can be the best scout, have the best eye for talent, but if the team doesn't do well, and there's, management changes, the possibility of you losing your job, not being retained once your contract is up is very high. That's probably the biggest negative regardless. I think that, the difference between European and international scout and a college scout or domestic scout, it's that, first of all, there are fewer of us, if I can say that, in the sense that I probably have more responsibility, even though statistically there are fewer NBA players, outside of the United States, there are still hundreds and hundreds of players to see, and that kind of falls under my responsibility. Now, some teams have more than one guy, perhaps, one lead guy and a regional guy, but still the quantity of players you need to see is quite high. As a college scout, you probably divide the responsibility and the number of players to see, is divided up amongst more people. I kind of feel that as an international scout, I had more responsibility and just more weight on my shoulders, just because for most of my career, I was actually the only one doing work for my team. Like I said, some teams have multiple people. I've always pretty much done my own thing. Then, obviously there'd be a guy that came over more than others from the United States, a college scout who also, doubled as, the go-to guy for international work. But that responsibility, though, was not a burden. That made me want to do my job better. I personally, that's one thing that, they said, I'm the guy, they depend on me, and that was great motivation personally. So.
Generally speaking, as an international scout, what is your role during the pre-draft process?
To be honest, I don't know if it's that different, from another scout, but I've always felt that, when pre-draft came, it was really my moment to shine, in the sense that probably during the season, I'd be in touch with the director of scouting and, maybe a couple of the other scouts, but the time I spent speaking with, say, with, the GM or something, would be less, because face it, during the season, the GM has, a lot on his table. They always have a lot on their table, but I'd have less time to, converse with them. As the draft approached, I found that, I'd have more and more face time with the boss, with the general manager, the president, whomever. And obviously in general, come draft, I'd be speaking more. We'd be having more and more conference calls. A lot of times it would just be me, speaking directly with the director of scouting, perhaps the general manager, because, maybe they needed, the general manager needed to catch up. And he wanted just some alone time, with me. So that's kind of what I think, might be different. Like I said, I don't know what the college scout experience is. Maybe it's the same thing for them, but I just felt that, closer we got to the draft, the more I was being asked to chime in on things, and the more perhaps the general manager, who I spoke with little during the season, would, want to know directly from me in person, and not through a report or through somebody else.
Was there any international players that you evaluated and lobbied for to your general manager to draft?
Well, definitely. I mean, it's like I said, it's my job. If I like a guy, it's definitely, I have the freedom. I'm encouraged. Everywhere I've worked, I've been encouraged to, express my opinion, and that's, been for all scouts. Perhaps sometimes it was, upper management didn't really mean that, but they always said that, and I always took, that at face value. The truth is, no team's going to draft a player, because I said so. But they obviously gave him consideration, and someone from, the United States would come watch him, and, the general manager would be watching video and maybe come see him himself at the end of the season, because I said so. Once again, it was always, divided. The decisions were always made as a group, collegiately. I feel that I could single out one player that, I really had a major role in, and that was Nicholas Batum when I was with Portland. Not that Nicholas was an unknown, everybody knew him. We liked him, and we ended up drafting him, in fact, in the mid-20s. But I had him as a lottery pick, whereas, most of my staff liked him in the 20s, where we indeed ended up picking him. But I had lobbied him for, guys, this is a no-brainer. If he's there at 20, whatever, we picked him at, we're getting a lottery pick in the 20s. And, I'd like to think that, I was right, because Nick has gone on to have, a pretty good NBA career, I'd say. He's been a career starter, with his despite his ups and downs, he's been a career starter.
Has there been any players that you were really high on that you regret not pushing harder to your general manager?
I guess, it's always, in hindsight, you're always like, it's usually, well, that guy turned out to be really good. Damn, I always liked him, but my people weren't that high on him. I should have. In hindsight, I'd say one guy that literally in the draft room, I had, we had a pick coming up, early second round pick coming up, and, he was my guy. It was Marc Gasol. We ended up going a different way. I thought that Marc, and keep in mind, I never thought Marc Gasol would be an all-star in the NBA. I thought he'd be a top-notch backup, borderline fringe starter, best-case scenario. But where he was drafted and where we were looking at him, I thought he was a great pick. So that's one guy I regret, not pushing harder for, Marc Gasol.
How important do you think intel is in background research in order to evaluate an international prospect properly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably just as important as it is with a collegiate player. Let's face it. We're scouting. College, basketball scouting, probably scouting in any sport, has become more of an information business. Anybody can have access to games now. Anybody that knows the game could probably offer, good observations. Hey, I noticed that he always, pivots to his right rather than to his left. So yeah, intel is increasingly more a difference maker. I think that with international players, it's just as important, if not more important, simply because they're often lesser known commodities. Like I said, a college guy, even a one and done guy, there's still, you're going to have technically, more people that you can reasonably ask, more people that you have access to. Just think that, a college team is like an NBA team has many different people on staff. Even high-level pro European teams usually only have 2 assistant coaches, 1 trainer, and 1 perhaps team manager. That's it. There are not many people to ask. So even if I, ask everybody that works with that kid, realistically, in a given year, it's only 4 or 5 people. Then sure, I can ask, teammates if I've asked them. But really, there are a couple coaches, a trainer, and yeah, I can go back, maybe to his junior team coach. But if you think about a college player, college staff, you have the kid's academic advisor, you have the high school coach, the high school counselor. You have, quantity-wise, you have many more sources for American kids compared to international kids. So with international kids, you really have to make sure your intel is top-notch and that people are being, straight with you.
So let's talk about this year's draft a little bit. You wrote an article for Babcock Hoops back in March about international players this year. You rated Deni Avdija from Israel as the top international prospect. Have you seen him in person, and what do you think it is that makes him so special?
Well, obviously, to rank him that high, I have to have seen him in person many times, which I have. I've been following Deni since he was 16. And the thing about Deni is that every time I saw him, he was always playing a couple years up. When he was 16, he was playing with 18-year-olds. When he was 18, he was playing with 20-year-olds. And, as an 18-year-old, he was MVP of the European Under-20 Championship, and there were some very good players there. It's not like, there was nobody, so, he was better than everybody. And same thing at the pro level, he, like I said, he's shown great improvement. And that's the other thing, that every time I've seen him, he's shown improvements, whether it was playing in a junior game or at the pro game. His first couple EuroLeague games, he didn't get many minutes. He didn't get many touches. He was, kind of, deferring to others. But later in the season, he was getting more minutes. He was getting more touches. He was being more assertive. And in the playoffs right now, obviously I haven't seen him live, since they returned to action in the Israeli league. But he's putting up starter numbers. He's been having 18, 20-point games in the Israeli league playoffs. So, like I said, that's what you want. In the end, that's what you want from a player. Obviously, you want to see and know that he works hard, but you want to see improvements. Because, if you think that this guy has the potential to be a good role player, or perhaps even a starter in the NBA, and he shows, improvement every time you see him, there's a good chance that he's going to reach that potential.
Earlier in the season, you had the opportunity to sit down with French point guard Killian Hayes to do a Q&A. Babcock Hoops currently has Hayes at number 7 pick on our mock draft. How was that experience of meeting and talking with Killian?
It was a great experience both on a professional and a personal level. It's always nice to be face to face with a kid and kind of get a better feel for him. Like I said, Killian I had already seen many times when he was playing in the French league, both the French junior league, the Espoir league as they call it, Espoir, which means hopes, as in future hopes, as well as with the pro team. At age 17, he was already getting rotation minutes with the Cholet team. So it was actually kind of a surprise that he went to play in Germany. But he, like I said, he knew what he was doing. He took a calculated risk, if you may, and he had an opportunity to start there, and things really worked out for him. And like I said, when I met him, I just got a really positive vibe. He was at the same time came off as being very confident without being too cocky, but humble at the same time. That's a rare combo. Sometimes guys, are humble but a little insecure, not assertive enough. But sometimes guys, yeah, they're confident but borderline cocky and not necessarily in a good way. And I just got this image of him that what I saw on the court, I saw he was for real as a person. And like I said, he really took his game to a next level this season. Killian is probably the player, even though I was always high on him, and I always had him, as one of the top 3-4 European prospects for this draft. He's the one that's improved the most, and you can argue that he's the top player. I define him and Deni Avdija as 1A and 1B, if you may, because they've both really rose to the top and separated themselves from the other top international prospects.
Who are some of the other international players that you would think be really strong picks in this year's draft?
Yeah, well, the names that are coming up here, Theo Maledon from France is a name that's been around for a while. He had a solid season. It's funny how I think his stock has dropped a bit, but not because he hasn't played well. It's just that some players, Killian Hayes in particular, who many, including myself, had rated behind Theo 2 years ago, perhaps improved more than Theo Maledon. But I think Theo is going to be a good NBA player, perhaps more of a combo guard than a true point. He's a guy that plays really well off the ball, but I think he's going to be a solid pro player, and I definitely think he will be a first round player as projected, probably more in the second half of the first round rather than the lottery pick, but I think he'll definitely go in the first round as projected. The next best, the next tier would be the two climbers, the two guys that most didn't have as first rounders going into the season, but have really, climbed up the ladder. These two players in particular are Alexei Pokusevski and Leandro Bolmaro. Alexei Pokusevski, I've always been very high, in an early, draft picks, in an early article that I wrote last summer, even before the season started. I had projected him as kind of the X factor this draft, saying that he's probably only an early second round guy, but he's definitely a first round talent, not a lottery talent. And despite not playing much at the pro level, like I said, this is where us scouts kind of earn our keep, because this is a guy where you really have to get as much information as you can, really, do your intel well, and obviously, go see him practice too. It's not a given, not all European teams offer access to practices to NBA scouts, so sometimes it can be tricky. Lucky, with Alexei, this was possible, and went to see him in the Greek second division. So Alexei Pokusevski, it's a lot of projection because as of now he hasn't proved much, but he's probably the player with the highest upside. Like I said, I'm not a gambling man. I don't know if I would want to put my job on the line to take him, in the first round, but he's a first round talent. And probably a lottery talent even. So it'll be interesting to see, who has the courage to take, Alexei, to pick Alexei eventually in the first round. The other player I mentioned is Leandro Bolmaro. Leandro Bolmaro is definitely a guy that, is also climbed up the ranks. And I personally, unlike Alexei Pokusevski, who I always indicated as a sleeper, potential first rounder going into this past season, Leandro Bolmaro, I had, in a list of, just a second round guy, mid to late second round guy. Definitely a guy to follow, definitely a solid player. But once again, the guy that wasn't playing much at the pro level, he hadn't proven much. But he's, like I said, just a guy that has shown something special. This is a guy that's shown great intangibles. The intel on him is excellent. Though he's played very little at the pro level, he has often played well. And, sometimes it may have been garbage time, but I still like to give credit to a guy who, even if he gets just garbage time minutes, though, he makes the most of those minutes. He always made, the few times I saw him play at the pro level, when it was admittedly only garbage time, he still did something special, whether it was a great pass or, just a hustle play, like diving to the floor for a loose ball. When you're up or down 20, a lot of guys don't do that. The fact that it came natural to him says a lot, to me. And obviously at the junior level and at the he was playing for the Barcelona satellite second division team also. There, obviously, when he got a chance, to have the ball in his hands, he showed a lot, and he's shown legitimate playmaking skills. Because once again, he was a guy who was kind of labeled more as a 2-3, perhaps a best case scenario combo guard. Instead, he's shown legitimate playmaking skills. So, he's at least a combo guard, if not a straight playmaker for the NBA, which makes him, even more interesting because he has the size. He's, probably 6'7" with shoes.
Do you think that any of these guys will stay in Europe as draft and stash guys, or do you think that they'll play in the NBA right away?
That's a good question. You never know. It ultimately depends on the team that drafts them. I'd say that obviously guys that are getting big minutes at the pro level, like Abdia and Maledon, it's a no-brainer that they're going to go straight to the NBA because whether they're ready or not, they're close to being ready, both mentally and physically. I would think that Alexei Pokusevski is the one guy that is a big question mark just because he's so underdeveloped physically. Once again, it depends on the team that drafts him. If a team thinks that he's going to benefit, more by gaining experience in Europe, they should keep him in Europe. On the other hand, though, some teams may have a different approach and say, you know what, if we're not sure he's going to play in Europe and he's obviously not ready to play in the NBA, we'll at least bring him over and have him, number one, work with our strength and conditioning coach, where we know that we're going to be able to add some meat to his bones, and perhaps at least get some time with the G League team. So, like I said, kind of depends on the team that drafts him and what their long-term philosophy is.
Just a couple more questions for you. Where is your favorite place to go on a scouting trip in Europe?
Gosh, it's hard to say just one. I feel very blessed to have been literally paid to travel all over the world, Europe, in particular, but not just Europe. So, whereas sometimes I have gone to places that, I didn't love, there are a lot of places that I really, really enjoy. I'd say, in general, most of the bigger cities, the European capitals are all great cities that I enjoy going to. Obviously, I have, a special feel, for Barcelona and Madrid, if only because they're the two cities that I've probably scouted the most in. And I love Paris. And I have to say that whenever I go to scout in France, whenever there's a top French player to go see, obviously I'll go see him wherever I need to see him, but I will always make sure to catch the game his team plays in Paris also, in addition to traveling to wherever I need to. So those are probably my favorite spots.
So you're from Bologna, Italy, which of course is known for its food and wine. Travel is obviously limited right now due to the COVID. But if you were to suggest one restaurant and one dish from your hometown for someone that is visiting, what are your suggestions?
Well, my favorite food, which just happens to be, Bologna. Bologna is, one of Bologna's traditional foods. Is tortellini alla panna. Tortellini is a meat and cheese filled pasta, which can be served in many different ways. It can be served in broth. It can be served with, tomato meat sauce, or the way I like it, alla panna, in a simple white cream sauce with Parmesan cheese. For me, that's my favorite Italian dish, and it is also a local specialty. It was, created in Bologna. And if I had to say a name of one restaurant, it would be Rodrigo in downtown Bologna.
Wow, that definitely sounds delicious. Jason, I really appreciate your time and joining us on Babcock Hoops Q&A Sessions.
Thank you, Raquel, for having me. I hope we can do this again soon.
Me too.